Guten Tag, and welcome to the National Histories Podcast. In case you haven't listened before, we're endeavouring to tell the history of every single nation in the world, with one episode on each country. Following feedback from our dear listeners, I've picked a country that is small, in the hope that I can obey your endless demands and keep this episode a reasonable length. Perhaps 40 minutes or so. We shall see. So this week, I've selected Liechtenstein, or Liechtenstein. I don't know how to pronounce it. The internet's very funny on this. But it's that country, that tiny little country. Anyway, Alex is here too. He's alright, I guess. He is sometimes helpful when recounting the history of some countries, so I let him out of the cupboard occasionally. Alex, do you know anything about Liechtenstein?
Well, I know that it's like the Liechtenstein monarch has, I think, more powers today than any other European monarch does.
Yes.
So still, I think it still technically qualifies as a principality, does it not?
Yes.
Very
much so.
And yeah, I can't remember when it was, but I think they had a referendum, didn't they, on essentially the powers of the powers of the monarch or the prince. So that's quite interesting. Otherwise, not so much. I mean, I think I have some loose memory of what it was carved out of, like in the maybe early 18th century, something like that. But I can't really remember. So I'm sure you'll fill me in on those gaps.
I will indeed. And I can't wait to do so. But there are some juicy facts here. Do you want to hear them?
I absolutely do.
Excellent. So, Prince Joseph, or Joseph, I don't know how he'd want that pronounced, of Liechtenstein, is currently second in line to the monarchy of Liechtenstein, okay? Mm-hmm. However, more interestingly, if for some reason we in the UK decided that we were to realise the old Jacobite claim to the throne from the 1700s, he would be third in line to the throne in the UK. Okay?
That is interesting.
So, his great uncle, Franz Duke of Bavaria, is the current heir of the Jacobite claim, and he's 90 years old, and he has no children or heirs to speak of. So his brother, Joseph's granddad, would take over in the event of his death. Now, once he's plopped it, all the Bavarian titles will pass on to the male cousins, because in Bavaria they don't like women. But for Jacobites, they don't mind women inheriting property and titles, although I'm not sure they like women either. So anyway, we would get Sophie, hereditary princess of Liechtenstein. Okay? Now, she is married to the current monarch of Liechtenstein, and so following both their deaths, Joseph would inherit both titles to be the Jacobite king of the UK. But obviously, you know. Now, in terms of national anthem, this change wouldn't be that different for either the UK or Liechtenstein, as Liechtenstein uses the exact same tune as the UK's national anthem.
Does it
Fun
really?
Little factoid there, yeah. Well, they just didn't have as many composers in their country back in the day, maybe. I don't know why that
maybe
is.
not,
I
but
just
still
found it interesting.
You would have thought that they could have, I don't know, outsourced it to a German or an Austrian and said, come on,
yeah, but
do something decent.
Maybe they wanted to distinguish themselves from their neighbours.
Perhaps.
I don't know why that is, but it's fun nonetheless. And it's an interesting coincidence that the monarchs just so happen now to be, could be technically, even though I would like to say that it's rather unlikely that the UK would suddenly decide to render its own monarchy illegitimate quickly and reinstate the Jacobite claim. This is a fringe opinion in the UK that has the same level of support as people who don't believe Australia exists, or people who don't believe, or people who believe the Earth is flat, or people that believe that Alex is the best host on the National Histories podcast. All these people are fringe and should not be tolerated. Anyway, what were you going to say, Alex?
Oh, you're on a roll today.
I know.
No, I was going to say that I think this might loosely be the premise of the most recent Johnny English film.
Oh, really?
I might be getting that wrong, but in the latest Johnny English film, it's like a Frenchman, I think, who basically has some weird claim to the throne, and then stages some kind of quasi coup. I can't really remember because I'd had a few drinks when I watched this film, so
I'm sure you can't watch it without a few
completely
drinks.
wrong. But it was something about that he had very loose claim to the throne, and this, I don't know, it sounds like it's vaguely similar. So maybe that's maybe that's where they kind of got the idea from. I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the Jacobite claim, it is technically, it would have been the right claim back in the day, but the Parliament just said, nah, no Catholics. We're not having them. We don't like them. And then so the Jacobites were basically ruled out of succession. So we went to, Hanover to go and get a monarch from Germany who didn't even speak English. So, good old Georgie Porgy Pudding Empire won. Anyway. So the only other way that this could happen, and I think you've described the scenario perfectly, is if Liechtenstein invaded and took the UK by force and united the crowns. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's only like a 12% chance that's going to happen. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I'd say 12 to 15% is about right.
Yeah, I think so. Could happen, but it's unlikely. Okay, so geography. Liechtenstein is one of only 2 countries in the world that's doubly landlocked, meaning that to get to the sea, you'd have to pass through 2 other countries. Anyway, it's a mountainous country in Central Europe. Now, Liechtenstein is bordered by Switzerland to the west and to the south, and Austria to the east and to the north, so it's kind of sandwiched between the 2 countries. It is Europe's 4th smallest country, and to put this in perspective, the whole country has 1/3 of the population of Great Yarmouth. Wow. Or double the population of Leon Sea. I could go on.
You could.
But yeah, there we go. Just to put it in perspective there. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to get right into the history because I've got to be quick. Well, maybe not too quick. We'll see. Hey, Alex. So
measured quickness is what we're aiming for.
I think people just want concise history.
Concise history, precisely. So
we should stop
limiting waffling. Yeah. Limiting waffling.
Yeah. Okay. So people have been chilling in the area that is now Liechtenstein for quite a while. The oldest traces of human existence date back to the Middle Paleolithic era. So somewhere around 30,000 BCE. Okay. Now, Neolithic farming settlements were initially found in the valleys around 5,300 BCE. Okay. Now, around the Iron Age, the late Iron Age, we see some cultures flourishing in the region. So the Hallstatt and the Latini cultures. And from around 450 BCE, and they were possibly under some influence from both Greek and Etruscan civilizations. The Etruscans being on the Italian peninsula and kind of before Rome, if anyone knows. Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the most important tribal groups in the Alpine region were obviously the Helvetii, which Switzerland actually takes its name from. I can't bother to explain that, but there we go. We'll save that for Switzerland. Anyway, they're a cool tribe who we will save for Switzerland anyway. But basically, they rose to prominence and took some sort of control over the entire region. But then basically their rise to prominence coincided with one Julius Caesar. And we all know what happened to them after they met Julius Caesar. So in 58 BCE, at the Battle of Bibracte? I don't know. Anyway, Julius Caesar defeated the Alpine tribe. Yeah, Bibracte. I don't know. Anyway, Julius Caesar defeated them, basically. And therefore he brought the region sort of under control of the Roman Republic, though not like completely conquered, like client states and stuff like that. Anyway, by 15 BCE, Caesar's successor Tiberius conquered the entirety of the Alpine area. Liechtenstein was then integrated into the Roman province of Raetia?
Raetia or Raetia, maybe, yeah.
Raetia, yeah? Yeah, Raetia, that sounds familiar. Anyway, the area was maintained by the Roman military, who also maintained a large legionary camps in Brigantium in Austria and Magia in Switzerland. Okay, so kind of both sides of that, they're controlled by these large military encampments. A Roman road, which ran through the territory, was also created and maintained by these groups during this time. So it was a pretty important area for passing trade between all those Germanic-speaking tribes and people groups. And there was I watched a video the other day, quite extensive trade between the Romans and the Germanic people. They weren't just fighting
I'm sure there
all
was.
the time. And actually, the era after Julius Caesar was the era that saw the most of this trade before the Germanic tribes decided to have another go. So Roman control lasted for a couple of 100 years before the Germanic tribes decided to attack. Brigantium was destroyed by the Alemanni, and the Roman military presence of the region was no longer there really after that. And so Germanic influence started to creep into the culture. And so the Alemanni tribes had settled the area around 450 CE. Okay? So in the 6th century, the entire region became part of the Frankish Empire following Clovis I's victory over the Alemanni in 504 CE. So the area that became Liechtenstein remained under Frankish hegemony, which was kind of like the Merovingian and Carolingian dynasties. Charlemagne, all that juicy stuff. Anyway, the empire was divided by the Treaty of Verdun in 843 CE. And it was divided into 3, and this placed Liechtenstein under the possession of East Francia, but it would later be reunified with Middle Francia in the Holy Roman Empire around 1000 CE. Alright? So, still no actual Liechtenstein to speak of yet as a polity. Okay?
Just out of interest, sorry though.
Yeah.
During this period, did the area of Liechtenstein basically remain kind of unperturbed in the sense that it was always we're still referring to the same sort of rough area of land? That makes sense.
What do you mean?
Well, in the sense that... Oh, never mind. Forget that point.
Yeah, so it wasn't even like a recognised territory or anything like that.
Right, I see.
It was just part of these other groups. So there was no place called Liechtenstein at this time. It's just...
Right,
just
okay.
happened to be there. Okay.
But it could be a bit like the territorial... But in terms of like... I feel like Liechtenstein has been like a thing for quite a long time, isn't it? Even if it hasn't necessarily... Even if it's been, as you say... Sorry, okay, I'm jumping ahead, as usual.
You are jumping ahead. We're only at the end of the first millennium.
No, I know. I don't know why I'm getting so overexcited. I apologise.
Blimey, you just really want that knowledge, eh?
I do. I'm desperate for it.
Okay, so until about the 12th century, the predominant language of the area was Romansh, which is a language still spoken by some people in Switzerland today, though relatively few.
I swear the Swiss speak every language there is.
They do, but this one's kind of like a language, as you might expect. It's kind of hybrid between Latin and German. It's there are really few people that speak it today, but it's still around. Sure. But more German words became like piled onto the vocabulary, and then they just took the German language system and all that. So basically, German began to gain ground in the territory to reflect the German language and cultural dominance of the area and the settlement of all the German tribes that come about the place. Anyway, so let's get to this dynasty. Where does it come around? Now, bear with me, because the Holy Roman Empire is a mess. It's an ungodly mess, and I don't like it. To make an interesting episode on the Holy Roman Empire, I don't know how anyone could do it, because it just makes no sense. It's a stupid political system, and I don't like it. Anyway, I think I've made my
I was going to say, I've read this Wikipedia page.
Clear.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've read this Wikipedia page on a couple of occasions, and every time I've come away from it more confused than I was before I read it.
It is just confusing.
It really is.
Because no region seems to be treated the same. It's not like states or anything like that. It just kind of flows with the wind, and people own stuff in, right over to the west and then right over to the east, and they're their lands, and somehow they administer them. Very strange.
It's very clear how they do.
Yeah, no link at all. They just that's that. Anyway, so the dominions across the Alpine plateau were controlled by the houses of Savoy, Thuringia, Habsburg, and Kyburg. Okay. Now, other regions were accorded to imperial immediacy that granted the empire direct control of the mountain passes. So basically, some places were controlled by families who then they had the majority of control, but still were technically under the Holy Roman Empire and voted in that system. Sometimes members of those families became the emperor. And then some places, like the mountain passes, which were crucial for trade, the emperor wanted full control. And so he had full control over some of these places. Okay. Liechtenstein happens to be one of these areas that we get included in. So after the Kyburg dynasty. Okay, so the Kyburg dynasty they owned the area, and then they fell in 1264. Now the Habsburgs under King Rudolf I extended their territory into the Alpine plateau, and that included the territory of Liechtenstein. Okay. Now, Vaduz, which is the southern region of Liechtenstein, it's made up of two regions, and we'll get on to the other one in a minute, that gained imperial immediacy, and so it became subject of just the Holy Roman Emperor alone in 1396, okay? So they considered that area important, they wanted it, there we go. Although it wasn't actually that important. Anyway, the region was an oath to the counts of Hohenems, until the sale to the Liechtenstein dynasty in 1699. Okay, so basically, the emperor had it, and then he sold it off to, I don't know, to say thanks to some guy who supported him in a political battle, of which there were so many in the Holy Roman Empire, and then he sold it on to the Liechtenstein dynasty. Now, the family from which the principality takes its name originally came from Liechtenstein Castle in Lower Austria. So they're a country that's named after a castle in another country.
Great, yeah.
So basically, they had possessed that castle from at least 1140 until about the 13th century, where they sold it, and then they bought it back again from 1807 for old time's sakes. So that's fun, and they still own it. So the Liechtensteins acquired land, predominantly in Moravia, in Lower Austria, Silesia, and Styria. And as these territories were all held in feudal tenure, so basically they owned that land, but it was more for the emperor, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't a proper, member state, if you could say that, which you couldn't at this time. Basically, it's confusing, but they're secondary to the big states at the time, okay?
Yeah.
So they couldn't meet in the imperial diet or the parliament, of the time. So, even though Liechtenstein's princes served several Habsburg rulers as close advisors, without any territory held directly from the imperial throne, they held little power in the Holy Roman Empire, and so they were kind of, relegated to second-class nobles, poor things. For this reason, the family sought to acquire lands that would be classed as unmittelbar, or not sellable, and they started buying up these areas without any feudal tenure to try and increase their standing, basically. So during the 17th century, Karl I of Liechtenstein was made Fürst, which means prince, for the Holy Roman Emperor Matthias, and after siding with him in a political battle. Then his heir, Hans Adam I, was allowed to purchase the minuscule Herrschaft, or lordship, of Schellenberg and the county of Vaduz, which are the two areas that make up Liechtenstein. And so they did that in 1699 and 1712, respectively. And they purchased them from that family, the Hohenems. Okay? So, very confusing. Society didn't change at all in this time. Still feudal agriculture with a mountain pass going through for trade.
But now technically the two parts that make up contemporary or modern day Liechtenstein have been purchased and brought together.
The borders don't change.
Right, okay.
So that's what's happened. But it's still really small, insignificant. No one really thinks much of it. I mean,
gotcha.
That hasn't really changed too much, I guess. But anyway, sorry, Liechtenstein. I didn't mean to be so horrible.
So sorry to any of our listeners that might be from Liechtenstein for the offence that Luke may have just caused you.
Blimey. Anyway, so in 1719, after the lands had been purchased, of course, Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor, decreed that Vaduz and Schellenberg were united and elevated to the newly formed territory of Fürstentum, which is principality, with the name Liechtenstein in honour of his true servant, Anton Florian of Liechtenstein. Oh, lovely. Now, it was on this date that Liechtenstein became a sovereign member state of the Holy Roman Empire. So now it's been elevated, it's actually a thing because they've been united. And that's fun, although still a very small sovereign state of the Holy Roman Empire, it must be said. Now, it is a testament to the pure political expediency of the purchasers that the princes of Liechtenstein did not even visit the new principality for 100 years. The cheek of it. The cheek.
Yeah.
Didn't even go there. They just reaped the rewards of owning the territory.
Just signed a scroll, signed a bit of paperwork, and was like, yeah, whatever. What's next on the agenda?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, let's go hang out in Vienna and cafes and things. I don't know, whatever they do in Vienna. Anyway.
I mean, to be fair, there are lovely cafes in Vienna, so that's
I'm sure
not necessarily a bad thing to do.
But by the 19th century, as a result of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the Holy Roman Empire came under effective control of France, because Napoleon likes controlling things. So following the crushing defeat at Austerlitz by Napoleon in 1805, he effectively controlled the area. Now, Emperor Francis II abdicated, who was, even though his name's Francis, he was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. But yeah, anyway, he abdicated, ending more than 960 years of feudal government. Now, Napoleon reorganised much of the empire into this thing called the Confederation of the Rhine.
Yes.
Now, this political restructuring had broad consequences for Liechtenstein and the Holy Roman Empire, but we're not going to talk about that because I'm keeping this episode nice and short. So, for Liechtenstein, this basically meant that the historical, imperial, legal and political institutions had been dissolved, and they kind of started over again as a more modern Westphalian member state.
Right.
Okay? Now, the state ceased to owe any obligation to any feudal lord beyond its borders as well, which is where we see the first kind of area where Liechtenstein now has borders. It was recognised as a sovereign state, and now it's got this actual independence from the Holy Roman Empire, which it didn't have before. However, it's still part of the Confederation of the Rhine. Now, modern publications generally attribute Liechtenstein's sovereignty to these events. Its prince ceased to owe any obligation to any suzerain, and from 1806, when the Confederation of the Rhine was founded, the Prince of Liechtenstein was in fact a vassal of its hegemon, a style protector like the French Emperor Napoleon I himself, until the dissolution of the Confederation in 1813. Okay, so there was an actual protector, a lord protector over the land, administrating it, even though he wasn't actually there, which is also really cheeky. Anyway, soon afterward, Liechtenstein joined the German Confederation once Napoleon had gone away and lived out his days on an island. Anyway, so that lasted from 1815 to 1866. And this was mainly presided over by the Emperor of Austria, okay? Now, in 1818, Prince Johann I granted the territory a limited constitution. In that same year, Prince Alois? I don't know quite how to say his name.
No idea.
But he became the first member of the House of Liechtenstein to set foot in the principality that bore their name. Isn't that lovely? And he is an important character that kind of sticks around for a while, so that's nice. So the next visit would not occur, however, until 1842. But once he comes around good. So, well, actually not that good, but we'll get to that. So, why didn't they go? Why didn't the Liechtensteins go, Alex? Why do you think that?
No idea, but I was about to ask you that question, so why don't I ask why didn't they go?
Because of the Vienna cafes, of course. They're so lovely.
Obviously.
But yeah, basically, They wanted to hang around in the cities. They owned property all over the territories. And Liechtenstein just wasn't the best one, despite being named after them. So there we go. That's pretty much why. They weren't interested. It was far away from everything else they owned. And they didn't like it. Well, maybe they did like it. I don't know what they thought of it, to be honest. That's all conjecture and rubbish. But anyway, move on, because this episode is short and that was waffle. So, 1831, we get people rioting for something other than absolute rule. And that was only a little taste of something else to come. So, in the meantime, the first factory for making ceramics was opened, and a place where notoriously people like to talk about politics and unionize and demand constitutions. Anyway, 1848 saw revolution take hold all over Europe, and the same happened to Liechtenstein too. And revolutionaries formed an assembly and adopted a constitution and rejected the rule of Prince Alois. Anyway, they attended these events to actually flesh out a German country for German people, basically, and unite all the German speakers. However, by 1852, the revolutionary forces across Europe were all crushed, basically, and so Austria had gathered much of its political might back, and so they kind of backed Prince Alois to annul the constitution, and that he had Austria's backing to do it, and it was hardly like the 12 people that lived in Liechtenstein at this time were going to do anything about it. So there we go. I exaggerate for comedic effect, of course, although the amount of effect that comedy had was low, I'm sure. Sorry, I'm waffling again. Anyway.
You can't help it, can you?
I can't help it at all. However, okay, so 1861, we get a savings and loans bank, a sign of the financial dominance that shall arise in their economy. And it was first founded along with the first cotton weaving mill. So there's economic change going on in Liechtenstein. Slowly, but it's coming. All right. So 1866.
Meaning essentially industrialization.
Yes. So the German Confederation was dissolved in 1866, and Liechtenstein became an independent principality, but with heavy ties to Austria, as they were big and right next to them. So some people basically say it was independent only in name at this time, as the princes weren't exactly attentive to the needs of little old Liechtenstein. The extent of this is somewhat debated, but definitely very, very close to Austria. If Austria told them to do something, they did it, basically. But they didn't tell them to do that much, so there we go. Anyway, 1868, the Liechtenstein army was disbanded for financial reasons. Following this, most of the German-speaking world united under one nation with Prussia, but they snubbed Austria, and Switzerland wasn't that bothered. Alright, so Liechtenstein only borders Austria and Switzerland, the two nations who didn't join. So even though some people in the country really did want to join, they were unable to join because practically it wouldn't have worked. So that's sad for them. Anyway, 1872, a railway line between Switzerland and the Austro-Hungarian Empire was constructed throughout Liechtenstein, and later on in the century, 2 bridges over the Rhine to Switzerland were built as well. So basically, the territory now is getting economically very linked to Switzerland, and especially Austria and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the ruling princes of Liechtenstein continued to derive much of their wealth from territories in the Austrian Empire, and later the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austro-Hungarian Empire? Blimey, gonna get that right one day. Anyway, and they did that until World War I, really. And they spent much of their time in their 2 palaces in Vienna. Because, that's prime real estate right there. Anyway, economic devastation caused by the war forced the country to basically conclude a customs and monetary union with its other neighbour, Switzerland, as Austria kind of fell apart after World War I, as I'm sure many people are aware. The Austro-Hungarian Empire fell apart. So, yeah, they basically went kind of closer to Switzerland, although Switzerland were hardly going to demand that you come and join our little confederation. That's what they're all about, a little bit of independence. So anyway, Franz I, Prince of Liechtenstein from 1929 to 1938. Okay, so we're going to talk about him a little bit because he's important. Now, he succeeded to the throne at 75 years old. Fun stuff. And he just married a woman called Elisabeth von Gutmann, a wealthy woman from Vienna, whose father was a Jewish businessman from Moravia. Now, although Liechtenstein had no official Nazi party, a Nazi sympathy movement arose with its National Union Party. Local Liechtenstein Nazis identified Elizabeth with their own little Jewish problem, apparently. Right. There was kind of this thing, but they were seen as against the wishes of the... So in some ways, Liechtenstein's rulers were not so happy about this because, obviously, Elizabeth, one of them was a Jewish person. So in March 1938, just after the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany, Franz named as regent his 31-year-old grandnephew as heir presumptive, Prince Franz Joseph. Franz died earlier that year, though, and Franz Joseph succeeded to the throne. All right? So Franz Joseph II moved to Liechtenstein in 1938, a few days after Austria's annexation, because it was the only territory he had left, I'm sure. So during World War II...
So basically we're saying that the Liechtenstein monarch only cares to actually be in Liechtenstein when the place they prefer to be is annexed.
Yes, yeah. Literally anything other than Liechtenstein, except from if the Nazis come.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there we go. So during World War II, Liechtenstein remained officially neutral, looking to its neighbouring Switzerland for assistance and guidance on how to maintain this stance. While family treasures from dynastic lands and possessions from Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia were all taken to Liechtenstein for safekeeping, because that's its only use, apparently. At the close of the conflict, Czechoslovakia and Poland, acting to seize what they considered German possessions, expropriated the entirety of Liechtenstein's dynasty's property in all three of those regions, basically. These expropriations are subject to a modern legal dispute that still goes on, and basically includes over 1,600 kilometres squares of agricultural and forest land, and several family castles and palaces. So, rocky relations with the old...
that's interesting. So that's an ongoing dispute.
Yeah, I know, isn't it? But yeah, obviously the family owned all these lands, and then they were taken after the war. It's been acknowledged as well that despite the royal family's disapproval of the whole idea of there being a Jewish problem, it's been acknowledged that there were forced labour from concentration camps used in the territory during the World War II, which is obviously not good. After World War II, the country underwent a remarkably rapid transition into industrialisation, led by Franz Joseph II, who served as a prince from 1938 until his death in 1989. All right? Now, Liechtenstein was in dire financial straits following the end of the war in Europe, and so Liechtenstein's dynasty often resorted to selling family artistic treasures, all that stuff that had sort of like banked up in the territory, which was purchased. A lot of it was purchased, some paintings by Leonardo da Vinci and things like that. And so these things kept it afloat for a while. Like the US purchased a painting for $5 million in those times, $38 million in 2019 dollars. So yeah, record price for a painting in 1967, that Leonardo da Vinci one. So there we go, fun stuff. And that's how they ran their economy for a little while, selling off old family treasures. But by late 1970s, Liechtenstein used its low corporation tax rates to draw many companies and became one of the wealthiest countries in the world really quickly. Franz Josef II was succeeded by his son Hans Adam II, under whom Liechtenstein joined the United Nations in 1990, the European Free Trade Association in 1991, the European Economic Area in 1995, and the World Trade Organization in 1995 as well. Okay? So suddenly they're like a country on everyone's radar, alright? In terms of like, they're in the UN, they're in the European Free Trade Organization. It's all getting pretty easy for them to operate. Now, relations between the Landtag and the Prince, so the Landtag is like their form of parliament, and the Prince were often tense, okay? The Prince offered several constitutional amendments that would strengthen his role, and he frequently threatened to relocate to Australia if his wishes were not if his wishes were not granted.
I'll go back. I'll go back.
Could you imagine if Lizzie did that? She'd be like, I'll go back to Hanover.
Yeah.
I'll go back.
I will.
Honest.
I promise you I will, and I'll never come back.
I'm taking Philip too. Come on, Philip. They don't want us here. Clearly, they don't have the respect for us. Anyway, is that treasonous? I don't know. Anyway, I mean, we did talk about getting rid of them for the Jacobite claim, so not that we want that, of course. Our lovely Lizzie. But anyway, never mind. Anyway, so in a constitutional referendum in 2003, correction, I think I said 2004 earlier. Misremembered. Or maybe it was enacted in 2004, but it was done in 2003. Anyway, voters endorsed wider powers for the Prince because they really didn't want him to leave. And so this included the right to veto legislation, any legislation at all, and the ability to implement emergency powers and dismiss the government, even if it retained majority support in the Landtag. Okay, so basically, the referendum also gave citizens the right to call a vote of confidence in the Prince, which
a vote of no confidence. You mean
no confidence? Yeah, which could result in his removal. So it was kind of like that was the compromise of the whole thing. Like they could get rid of him if they wanted. So he can't be a massive, you know what? Which would call for citizens to get rid of him.
So presumably he can't veto. He can't veto a public referendum.
Yeah, but he can. He can't veto the only mechanism to get him out.
Yeah, sure.
But he's currently ruler until whatever. So they still do have a parliament and they do certain things, but
does he have any? Anything. Does he have any powers to veto legislation that goes through the Landtag?
Yes,
he does.
That's like the primary part of that.
So he can object to individual bits of legislation as well as the Landtag itself.
Other than that referendum on vote of no confidence, he has a say on everything if he wants it.
I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, I knew that his powers were quite significant, but I didn't know they were that far-reaching. I mean, that's quite extraordinary, really.
Yeah. And he actually so he took quite an involved part of the governance of the country. And in 2004, Hans Adam's son, Crown Prince Alois, I still can't pronounce that name. Damn it. Basically, he assumed day-to-day responsibilities of the royal governance, okay? Though his father actually remained officially head of state. So there are two tyrants now. I mean, they probably tyrants is a bad name.
I don't know if they would necessarily
like
the word tyrant being used.
So in 2006, the principality celebrated its 200th anniversary of existence. Mm. Isn't that fun? So all right. So lastly, what I have to say is that in 2011, Liechtenstein acceded to the Schengen Agreement, which is, if you don't know, one of the EU's founding documents that basically means you don't need borders like internally, and you can just saunter off into every country as you desire. So it's good for trade, basically. The treaty relaxed border controls with its signatories and enabled passport-free travel within the Schengen area. And so the powers of the monarchy were reaffirmed in July 2012 when voters overwhelmingly rejected a measure that would have stripped Alois of his veto. So, they kind of reaffirmed it in 2012, just for good measure. Yet we like the sun as well now.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So we go.
It's just I find that fascinating. If I can just add one other thing though, that maybe I think is important to mention, is the fact that they had one of the countries that had a massive tax evasion issue, during 2008, the crisis in 2008, if I'm right, and they were, for a time, weren't they blacklisted by the OECD? And I think they've since been removed from the blacklist.
Yeah, only recently.
Because they implemented some reforms. Yeah, quite recently.
Yeah. Because we were talking about this with Bermuda in the last episode, weren't
we? We were, yes.
These small little nations taking the
I'm assuming those reforms are probably necessary for it to join Schengen as well, or might be one of the stipulations. Feels like that probably is correct. I don't know.
Yeah, there would. I'm sure there would have been some, but of course at that time there wasn't the pressure on it that there is now. So like,
true,
because I know Luxembourg are another country that had. But they're an OG member of the old EU, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it's harder to come back down on Luxembourg, especially when their former prime minister was head of,
precisely
the European Commission. So
a certain special dispensation.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's I think it's curious. I'd like to know a bit more about I guess from what you've described, the relationship between the people, as it were, and the monarch is obviously quite healthy and quite good. They obviously like the monarchy, otherwise they wouldn't have voted in the way that they have done the past two referendums.
Yeah.
So that's I just find that curious. I find that interesting as to why there's obviously a certain degree of public skepticism towards the legislature in terms of whether it would do the right thing. I mean, maybe I'm misreading the situation, but
I don't know if it's that. I just feel that they probably. I think if they got an idiot monarch who is just taking liberties and crash the economy, they'd get rid of it, no question.
Yeah.
But the fact that they've actually quite competently, since the 70s, really revolutionised the country and the standard of living within the country.
Extremely high. I guess if you're doing well, then why change it? Just because you are a bit of an outlier, at least in terms of European democracy. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
If there's no reason to change, if people can't see a reason to change it, why would they change it?
No, I guess not. No, I don't want to say much more than that because I don't know. But it's just a curious case. It's interesting.
I quite like the idea, the hypothetical that we could have a referendum to see if Lizzie could rule.
I mean, as a bit of a Republican, and by that I don't mean it in the American sense. I mean it in the traditional sense of anti-royalist. I'm not sure I would like that so much, but I mean it would be fun.
But just in the way that they carry themselves, the royal family, right? You've got several generations of
not
necessarily
all of them. Let's just put that out there.
Well, Charles. People might have a little bit.
Charles's dalliances with the occasional bit of casual racism, and I'm thinking of somebody else who I'm sure is recently been embroiled in a bit of a controversy regarding Mr. Epstein.
Oh yeah, but he wouldn't be in line to rule.
No, of course he wouldn't be in line, but still part of the house, the family.
I'm sure Lizzie would sort him right out if she had
I have no doubt. Did you see that interview that he gave? Was it on BBC?
Yes.
Yeah, which was just absolutely shambolic. I would imagine afterwards she gave him an absolute rollicking. Oh. And rightly so. The hairdryer treatment that Sir Alex Ferguson used to give His Majesty United Prince.
If it were Prince Andrew, I'd hate it. But actually in the line of succession, I don't mind the look of the monarchy right now. Over both of the alternatives of political parties, it'd be interesting. To say the least.
Yeah, sure.
They'd have to govern for all the people. They wouldn't, the fundamental flaw of rule by majority, couldn't really do it, could you? Because at a moment's notice, some of the population could just pipe up and go, actually, we don't want you anymore. Anyway, I'm not actually an advocate of this, and I'm waffling. And that's the end of the episode.
I was about to say, look, we're doing really well on the time. Let's end it there. Let's stop the waffling.
Goodbye, everyone. I have nothing more to say. All right, maybe
Ta-da.
I will. Maybe I will just say one thing. That's the end of the episode. Let us know what you think. People from Liechtenstein or Liechtenstein, please tell us how it is acceptable for a boy from Norfolk to pronounce your name. Okay? In terms of not your actual name, the country's name. Because it's very inconsistent over the internet, and I think you have a problem there. Anyway, other than that, please follow us on social media, and all the bits and bobs that come along with that. We put loads of effort into our Instagram and Twitter posts, so please just give them a gander and a like. That's all we ask. Oh, and lovely reviews on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is. That'd be lovely, just lovely, wouldn't it, Alex?
It would.
Excellent. So now I actually have nothing more to say. Have a good week. Next week we'll have a new country for you. More fun, more banter. Lovely. Goodbye.
Goodbye.